Hey guys, it's Marshall Mathers the Fourth here, back to you today with another video. And in today's video, I would like to make a part 3 to why are Black Americans so sensitive. And this will be the last and final part that I will make of this series. And I want to start out by saying that I think it's really ridiculous and sad that so many Black Americans, not all of them, which is a great thing, but a lot of them still are, maybe even most of them, are still complaining and whining and moaning and acting like victims because of the effect of slavery that it has on them as people. And even though it happened to their ancestors, and if their ancestors were still alive to this very day, I know for a fact that their ancestors, if they were able to live to 100 years old or even older, they would be absolutely disgusted, ashamed, embarrassed, and humiliated with how modern day Black Americans sadly turned out to be in the long run, and what they gradually evolved into becoming, unfortunately. Like, honestly, it surprises me that so many Black Americans don't even at least think to themselves, you know what, maybe I am being a bit irrational or even insane. Because after all, it's not like slavery specifically happened to me, and I have way more opportunities and privileges than compared to any of those African slaves from way back in the day. Like, seriously, it honestly blows my mind that so many Black Americans don't even at least take a step back and think to themselves, you know what, maybe we are being kind of ridiculous as a race of people, as a group of people, because we are all acting like slavery is still going on to this day to us. Or even more so, that we ourselves, modern day Black Americans, are still slaves to this very day. And that the effect of slavery will take an extremely long time to get over or to overcome. And I just think that is crazy, because slavery ended way back in the 1800s. I mean, let's be real here. And it's sad because, you know, modern Black Americans in this country of America act as if there isn't slavery going on elsewhere in the world, or as if slavery going on elsewhere in the world isn't even much worse than the slavery that happened in America many fucking years ago. And I'm not acting like slavery wasn't a bad thing. We all know that. We are not stupid. We're not idiots. We're not morons. You could ask anyone what they actually think of slavery, and they would say it's a bad thing. And it doesn't even matter whether it happens to Black people, white people, or whoever. Slavery in general as a whole is a terrible thing. We can all agree on that. And that's another thing that I honestly am annoyed by, that Black Americans act as if they were the only slaves that have ever existed, or ever have actually been slaves, physically. As if there have never been any white slaves or Muslim slaves, or any other race of slaves, which is not true. There are other races or other groups of slaves just like there were African slaves from way back in the day. But so many black Americans act as if their ancestors were the only slaves to ever exist in the history of the world. And I just think that is really just pathetic and just kind of ridiculous that they act as if they had it the most bad. Like, statistically, like, throughout history, like, African people have had it, like, much worse than anyone else. Or black Americans or whatever. Like, it's just so dumb. And it's not true. And, you know, I want to tell all you black Americans right now that there is slavery even going on in Africa as we speak. I mean, seriously, honest to God, there is slavery going on in Africa. I wouldn't be surprised if there are even Africans who own and have African slaves. I wouldn't be surprised if there are Muslims who have African slaves, and so on and so forth. I mean, slavery was not or is not exclusive to America. America is not the only country that ever did slavery, or that slavery was ever a thing, or that it ever existed in just this country alone and no other country in the world. Because there is still slavery going on to this very day in other countries or other continents in the world, because Africa is a continent and not a country. And yet, modern black Americans never admit that. They never, like, admit that to being true, or think about that, or realize that, or consider that, or whatever. There is slavery going on in other countries or continents in other places of the world. And that's just the simple point I'm trying to make here. And, you know, I know also that if any of the African slaves from way back in the day could see the way that modern day black Americans are acting and behaving, and the way they have been thinking for so long, they would be ashamed of them, disgusted by them. They would be ashamed. They would be humiliated and embarrassed. Why? Because, let's just say, if human lifespan was like way higher, like, let's just say human beings were able to live to like 1,000 years or 500 or 200 years, 300 or whatever. And if any of the African slaves were able to live until today, or even since the past like 10 years or something like that, they would be just sickened with how black Americans, modern day black Americans since like 2010, have not been realizing and being grateful and thankful and appreciative of all the many opportunities and privileges they have that they could easily get if they tried, if they made the commitment, if they had the motivation, if they had the drive, if, like, they could even be innovators. Like, seriously. If they actually tried, they could be like millionaires and billionaires. They could be like the next Bill Gates or the next Mark Zuckerberg or something. But instead, black Americans want to complain. They want to stay and remain victims. And you know what? I can't say that I completely judge them or act as if I don't understand them there, because you know what? Being a victim is really easy. And not only is being a victim really easy, but it's kind of fun. It's kind of fun feeling that you're a victim. And it's also kind of fun to complain. And I will admit that because I myself think of myself as a victim. I love to complain. I enjoy to rant and rave. I enjoy to speak from my mind that many people say is complaining. And if that's the case, then I guess I enjoy complaining. Plus, I'm addicted to it anyway. And I think that's another thing that happens to so many Black Americans, modern day Black Americans in specific. They get so addicted to complaining. Like it's like a drug to them. You know, when you take drugs and you get addicted to them, and they're hard to quit. They're hard to stop because they're so incredibly addictive. And I could say the same for myself. I've been complaining and whining and moaning and acting like a victim for so many years. Well, I actually do believe that I'm a victim, and I have actually like logical reasons, at least that I feel, prove that I am a victim. And, you know, I do think that there are certain people in this world that are actually victims, even more than me, way more than me even, and maybe even perhaps certain people here in America, but most people aren't. At the end of the day, most people are not victims, but they still like to act that way. And you know what? If I had the opportunities and privileges that most Black Americans have, I would totally take that into account. I would totally take that into consideration. Like if I would have been lucky enough and privileged enough and spoiled enough of being born and raised in a big city, regardless of what big city it would have been, just like so many of them are, and honestly most of them, I would totally take control of my life. I would be so happy. I would totally look forward to growing up, becoming a teenager, getting a job, making my own money, being independent, and working my way up. Maybe getting raise at jobs that I would have worked at, and maybe eventually starting my own business, or saving up to buy certain things to maybe become a YouTuber or something. If I had even some of the opportunities and privileges that so many Black Americans have themselves, I would be so much more happier. I would be so much more content, grateful, appreciative, and thankful of my life. But the truth of the matter of fact is, I don't. I don't have even close to the amount of opportunities and privileges that so many countless Black Americans have themselves, that sadly they don't even realize. They don't take into account. They don't see, as if they are completely blind to all the many opportunities and privileges that they themselves have, that they're lucky enough of having, because so many of them, most of them honestly, have the blessing of being raised in big cities. Because it's not like everyone gets that chance. I certainly didn't. And, you know, one thing I also want to say in this video is that, a message, honestly, to Black Americans watching this video, if any of you are, and just please hear me out. You know the reasons why you guys, or your race of people, think and believe that you guys are still victims of the effect of slavery that it has had on your people or your kind? You know why you still feel that way to this day? You know why you still feel enslaved? I'll tell you why. There's a really simple explanation to all this. It's because you people, most of you, not all of you, but most of you are enslaved to the Democrat Party. I mean, literally, honest to God, I'm not kidding any of you. You and your kind are enslaved to the Democrat Party that has gained like full-on control of your minds, brainwashing so many of you people for many, many years, and manipulating so many of your minds. I mean, think about it for a second. Why is it that, like, I don't know, like 90 or maybe even 95% of black Americans vote Democrat over and over and over and over and over again? And why is it that you guys are so, like, indebted to the Democrat Party, or that your allegiance is, like, embedded to them? Like, you can't escape their clutches. You can't, like, go your own way. You can't walk away from that party. You're, like, stuck and trapped. You're, like, imprisoned to the Democrat Party, to the Democrat vote. That's why you feel enslaved. And yet none of you are, like, willing to admit this truth, this obvious and clear truth that so many of you, again, not all of you, but most of you, are in fact enslaved to the Democrat Party, to the Democrat vote, to liberal politicians, liberal celebrities, liberal, like, news channel hosts, or whatever you want to call them, news anchors. You're enslaved to that party. Just all around enslaved to it. That's why you still feel the effect of slavery. And you know what? All the modern Democrats you see of today, let me just say something. All of the Democrats, the modern Democrats you see today, were liberals. Whether they're, like, news channel talk show hosts, or radio station talk show hosts, or liberal politicians, or liberal celebrities. Maybe not so much liberal celebrities, but definitely liberal politicians and liberal, like, news channel people. Those are the descendants of slave owners. Honest to God, those are the descendants of slave owners. And you know how I can tell this for a fact? And just hear me out and bear with me. The Democrats of back then, even if they weren't called Democrats, or whoever they were, whoever the people were who owned African slaves back then, which was, by the way, only 1%, whoever they were, knew that because slavery ended, it's not like they could physically still keep black people enslaved to them, but emotionally and mentally speaking, they could. They were able to brainwash and manipulate so many countless black Americans for so many years, to the point where they pretty much got them right back in their clutches. They got them right back to being enslaved to them. The same people who enslaved your ancestors that you all seem to care about so much, the same people who did that to them have enslaved the majority of you black Americans emotionally and mentally. Because obviously they can't do it physically, but do you really think that they would give up that easy? Do you really think that they would give up on having you black people stay and remain enslaved to them? No, of course they wouldn't. And that's why they came up with the smart, bright idea of enslaving you once again, emotionally and mentally, by using propaganda and agenda to brainwash and to manipulate people of your race, which is really tragic, but it is a fact. It is a fact. And also, like, even when it comes to, like, the people who did enslave African slaves, there was only 1%. I mean, that is something the mainstream media, liberal celebrities, liberal politicians, and liberal radio talk show hosts or whatever will never say. You know why? Because they want to lie. If they were to tell you the truth, they would expose themselves. You really think they're going to do that? No. No. They're trying to keep up this lie as long as they possibly can, to keep so many of you black Americans enslaved to their party. But 1% of people actually owned African slaves back then. And you know why it was actually such a low percentage or amount? Because having African slaves in America were not cheap. I mean, think about it. Having slaves, it's like having servants. It's not cheap. You have to buy them out. You have to pay for them. You have to pay to buy them or whatever. And you know what? Some slave owners were actually, honest to God, not even that bad. Some slave owners would actually pay their African slaves for the work they did. I mean, seriously, some slave owners even gave them a place to sleep, fed them, clothed them, even gave them a house to stay in. Even if it wasn't that good of a house, it was still a house. They still gave them a bed, clothes, food, and some of them even money. And of course, a lot of them were bad. Well, not a lot of them, but some of them were bad, who of course raped their African slaves, beat them, lynched them if they tried to escape, shot them, which is really evil, obviously, really extremely wicked, no doubt about it. But it's like all the modern, well, not all of them, but most of the modern day black Americans act as if all slave owners were just totally like full-blown, full-on wicked and evil to their slaves. And that was not even true. Some of them were, absolutely. And I just said, like, the ones who were bad did what they did. But the good ones, like, are they going to be judged? The ones who fed their slaves, gave their slaves a house and a bed, maybe even clothes, and food, and money, And, like, the good slave owners, like, some of them even made friends with their slaves that they had. And you know what's even also kind of funny about it? There was actually, honest to God, even some black, even here in America, there was some black slave owners. And you know why people owned even African slaves way back then? Because African people have something that they are, like, really blessed with having. Really lucky that they have what I'm about to say, and that they're really prideful of too, and they love to brag about and boast about and show off, and I understand why they do. I'm annoyed with it, but I understand why they do. Is they have melanin in their skin. See, other races of people, especially white people, would not be able to be out in the fucking hot, burning, scorching sun for the amount of time and hours that African slaves were themselves. And African slaves, because of the melanin in their skin, and I'm just speaking what's a fact here about them, because of the melanin in their skin, it works as a shield, like a protectant from the sun or from the UV rays. So black people don't get skin cancer or other skin diseases. They don't get sunburn. I mean, honestly, their black, dark skin works like a shield, literally a shield from the sun, from the sunlight, from the heat of the sun, from the UV rays, from the hotness of the sun or whatever. Like, they don't get skin cancer, they don't get other skin diseases, they don't get sunburn. I mean, they should actually feel really good about themselves because of that. Because not everyone is blessed with having melanin. Certainly not white people. And that's why African people were slaves in the first place. I'm just trying to tell you guys why the Africans way back in the day were slaves. And again, I'm not saying that slavery was like a good or great thing, or that they should have ever been slaves, and I hope none of you get that intention. But, like, you know what the mainstream media also doesn't talk about, like I said earlier in this video, is how there was even some black American slave owners. Some black men who owned African slaves. Literally. But at the end of the day, only 1%, that's a fucking low ass amount that the mainstream media, and let's face it, blows out of proportion, and they make it seem like 90% or 99.9% of Americans were slave owners. Yeah, but I'm sure there were a lot of poor ones who would not have been able to afford African slaves, and I'm sure they weren't cheap to buy. Like, no, they weren't. And like I said, there were some good slave owners who fed their slaves, who gave their slaves a house to live in, a bed to sleep on, clothes to wear, food in their belly, and money. I mean, even if it wasn't much, it was still something. It's better than not having or making any money at all. Some slave owners even became friends with their slaves they had, literally. But again, of course, there were some bad ones. I don't deny that for a second. And I obviously know that there were, or was. But I just find it just silly that so many black Americans act as if they're still, like, physically enslaved to this day. Emotionally and mentally, you are enslaved. But not because of the effect on slavery. You're still emotionally, mentally enslaved because the people, the descendants of this slave owners, found a way, found a really smart, wise way to keep you enslaved to them, but this time emotionally and mentally, by brainwashing you and manipulating so many of you into believing all these false bullshit narratives and notions pushed and promoted by the mainstream media, by Hollywood, by liberal politicians and liberal celebrities and liberal news anchors and liberal radio talk show hosts, that they cram down your throats that so many of you believe and run with. That's why you still feel enslaved, and that's why you are. Because you're enslaved to the Democrat Party. I mean, even Malcolm X himself said, one of the last speeches he gave before being shot or assassinated just 2 days later. I mean, whoa, that's very soon after he gave this speech, which was in the 60s. He said himself that the Democrats are playing black Americans for a chump. I guess back then chump probably meant like fool or something. And he said, and if you vote for them, if you're a black American, and if you vote Democrat, not only are you a chump, but you're also a traitor to your race. I mean, and if you don't believe me, just please take the time out of your day, if you yourself are a black American that may just so happen to be watching this video, for your own benefit, look up Malcolm X's thoughts on Democrats. Seriously. Like, and don't take my word for it. Look up what he said. I mean, I know even if Malcolm X were still alive to this day, who's one of Black Americans' many heroes and idols and, people that so many Black Americans look up to even to this day, but they will not ever acknowledge or talk about or see or hear what he said about the Democrat Party, and specifically Black Americans who vote for the Democrat Party. And you know what? He was right. And I agree with him as a white guy. And I know if he were still alive, I would probably be one of his followers. And I mean, he used to be racist and he used to be very radical, but when he went on the Hajj and he saw all the white Muslims that he did, he wanted to come back to America and not only have Black followers, but also white, also Asian. He wanted to expand with people that he hoped would follow him. And not just Black people, but white, Asian, whatever. He wanted so many people to follow him. But sadly, he was assassinated, as we all know. And I kind of see why. Because he spoke out against the Democrat Party. He bashed them. He exposed them for what they truly were. And he, of course, bashed Black Americans who vote Democrat. And yet so many Black Americans think he's so cool. And yet they still keep voting Democrat. He would be sickened and disgusted and pissed off if he were still alive, seeing that most Black Americans have been enslaved and keep voting for the Democrat Party. He'd be pissed if he were still alive. And I know this for a fact. I mean, like I said, he said that the Democrats are playing you for a chump when talking to an audience of Black people specifically. And then he said, and if you vote for them, and if you're Black, not only are you a chump, but you're also a traitor to your race. The only reason why the Democrats are even still in power as long as they have been and have as much power and influence and whatnot that they do is all thanks to and because of Black Americans. If it weren't for as many Black Americans who vote for them, who stay and remain enslaved to that vote, to that party, they would be under the bus right now as we speak. They would be ruined. And Democrats are even scared that they'll lose the Black vote and that Black Americans will start waking up and realizing that bullshit party for what it really is. They're scared shitless of losing Black votes. Any Black votes at all. But, of course, most Black Americans will still choose to vote Democrat because, like Malcolm X would say, because they're chumps and they're traitors to their race. They're traitors to their race. Regardless of if they realize it or not, they are. And that's what even he himself said. I'm just quoting what he said. This is not my quote or my word. This was his, from his mouth. And it's just really sad. And I also want to say in this video something too, that one thing I honestly don't understand or get about so many Black Americans that I want to say in this video, and will probably be the last thing I do say, that I seriously don't understand this. I really, honest to God, don't get this. I don't know why so many of you Black Americans are like this, but yet you are. Whenever a Black man or Black woman gets shot and killed by a police officer here in America, and supposedly, or apparently, according to the mainstream media and all liberals in general, it's an unarmed Black man or Black woman, and that they were innocent or whatever, and that they didn't do anything wrong. And what I don't understand and get is that so many of you Black Americans lose your shit and you flip out, you freak out, you go berserk, you go ballistic every time you hear about a white police officer who killed a black man or woman, like, because of their skin color, simply because they're black or whatever. And yet, this could be a black person that you never met, and that is a complete stranger. And yet you flip out, you lose your shit, you go ballistic, you go nuts, you go psycho, you start tearing and ripping shit up because of some black man or black woman who was shot and killed by a police officer who was supposedly and apparently innocent and did nothing wrong and was unarmed, that you never even met. That's a stranger. I mean, how would you black Americans feel if white Americans did what you do? What if you saw white Americans burning cities to the ground, looting, rioting every single time a white person is shot and killed by a police officer, or kneed on the back, or whatever? Or how would you feel if you saw Mexican Americans doing that, Asian Americans doing that, Indian Americans doing that, Native Americans doing that, Muslim Americans doing that? How would you black Americans feel if you saw other races of people doing that? Going absolutely insane and crazy over the death of someone that they probably didn't know in person and never met. A complete stranger. That's weird. That's bizarre. That is odd. That doesn't make sense. It's messed up. Why would you freak out over someone dying that you never even met or personally knew? How does that make any sense? At least it doesn't to me. I don't get that. Why do so many of you black Americans act out when any one of your race is killed? As if you're the only people who have this happen to them, which is not true. White people get killed by police officers. Terrible police officers. Mexican people can too. Asian people can. Indian people can. Muslim people can. You guys are not the only people who go through this shit, who face police brutality, who have people from your race who are victims of bad police officers. But other races of people don't flip out. They don't go ballistic. They don't lose their shit. They don't burn cities to the ground and start looting and rioting and shit like that, and blocking off streets and highways and freeways and whatever. Like, you're overreacting. Stop it. Stop it. Seriously. You're not helping yourselves or your people. You're making your race of people look bad is what you're doing. You're making yourselves look like animals who have, like, no minds whatsoever. Who have no common sense. You guys are making yourselves look terrible. Like the worst people in the world. I'm sorry to break it to you, and I hate to be the one to say it, but you guys honestly are making yourselves look bad. You're giving yourselves a bad name. And you know what? I feel so bad for all the genuinely good black Americans. You know why? Because whenever these bad black Americans go out and do this dumb shit, it makes all the good ones look bad too. Because it makes all black people look like that. It makes them all look bad. It makes them all look like animals, like monsters, who don't have any common sense, who don't have a brain. It's just unbelievable. And yet, you black Americans don't see it. You don't realize it. You don't see how bad you're making yourselves look. And you guys are hurting yourselves. You're hurting your race of people. You're making people of the same race look bad. You're not just making yourselves look bad, no. You're making other black people who are of the same race, who have the same skin color, look bad. Like, why would you do that? Why would you want to make your own race look like just a bunch of ravaging dogs? A bunch of rabid dogs. Why would you want to make people of your race who are contributors of society, who are good, hardworking Americans, who are genuinely good people all around, look bad themselves? Why would you do that? You know, you're making your parents look bad, you're making your families look bad, you're making other black people look bad. And I'm glad that good black Americans do condemn the bad ones and do like call them out and do judge them or bash them. Like, I'm glad that there are some good black Americans out there, even if it isn't as many as the bad ones, that are not going to stand for the bad ones. They're not going to support them. They're not going to, like, agree with their actions or what they're choosing to do. And it's just honestly sad that our country allows so many black Americans to get away with being just total anarchists. Like, our country allows this, it puts up with this, it condones it, it allows it, it supports it, it encourages it. And that's another thing. Like, liberals encourage destruction and violence from black Americans. They support all of it. They promote resisting. They encourage black Americans to keep on resisting arrest, making shows about it, movies about it. And you know why these liberals are also doing this? Because they want black people to destroy themselves and their communities. And that's exactly what they're doing. And on top of that, you know why liberals are also encouraging this? Is because they have bodyguards, they have security, they live behind gated communities, they live nice upscale lives, while the rest of black Americans are destroying themselves and their people. They're destroying their own communities, while the liberals are looking back and laughing. Even the black liberals, they're looking at how foolish the rest of black Americans are. And they're just sipping wine in their mansions and just having a grand old time looking at all the foolish black Americans who are destroying themselves and their communities. And it's just sad. It's really, really sad. And again, I don't understand or get why so many of you black Americans lose your shit, go ballistic, become total anarchists because someone you never met, that just so happened to be from the same race, apparently who was unarmed and innocent, was shot and killed by a police officer. As if you're the only people who have to deal with that issue and problem within your community. No. And you act as if every time a police officer kills a person from your race, as if they're doing it to you. As if it's like a personal attack to you. It's just ridiculous. Honestly, it's just ridiculous how so many of you black Americans are acting and behaving. It's sad. It's crushing. And like I said, you act as if police officers are attacking you. Like, you yourself are fine. And if you're fine, just go about your day like everyone else is doing. Why should you care about someone you never even met who's a total stranger? Have the people in those people's families care about them and feel bad for them and feel mad that they died. It doesn't need to be all you black people. I don't know. I just don't get it. But let me know what you all think in the comment section down below. I'm out.